Welcome to Roll to Save, the RPG history podcast. Pendragon. So, hello and welcome to another episode of Roll to Save. I am joined here today by Jason, as usual. Hello, Jason.
Hey, Iain, how's it going?
It is going well. We are fully into autumn here in Utah. I think I'm in the last of the sitting out on my deck with a cigar weather. That is sadly leaving us. So I managed to do that on Friday, but it's slowly getting colder and colder. So we're not going to be able to do that much longer. I say colder and colder, it's a relative thing. I think it was 27 degrees the other day, which is still pretty warm, but when we're used to 38 degrees, that's getting colder.
Still a bit higher than we get down here in Cork, so I think we might have had one day where we reached about 27 degrees at the height of summer. The only reason you can tell the seasons in Ireland is that the rain is warmer or colder depending on what part of the year you're in.
Yeah. So how are things down in sunny Cork?
Lovely. Sunny Cork is soon to be exchanged for the sunny southeast and the town of Wexford. So I'm moving east. I'm going to become a yellow belly, which is what the nickname for people from Wexford is.
Irish regional rivalries.
Yeah, all due to the hurling and GAA colours rather than anything else. But yeah, famous for strawberries and potatoes.
Okay. Strawberries is a non-stereotypical thing to go on there. But,
yeah.
Well, we had a bit of a fun bit of podcast news the other week. Apparently, we were the number 5 RPG podcast in Austria.
Number 5?
Amuses me greatly.
Wow.
Number 5, we were above Critical Role in Austria.
Vielen Dank, Österreich.
Ja, sehr gut. And there's the extent of my German. I was saying that I can order taxis. I can carry bitte ein insert noun. As long as I know a noun, I can ask for it.
Well done.
But then when they reply to me, I'm not very good at the rest. So, confession for our Austrian listeners.
That happened to me in Paris. I went into Paris and I did my best to work out what I was asking for. I asked for it. The guy immediately knew what I wanted and then answered me, and that was where I was lost. I was like, oh, well, I just then pointed and made like sad monkey noises, and he let me off. So yeah, not very good at that.
That's actually quite good for Paris. They're normally a bit kind of it is la gare, not le gare. That's my French accent, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't have Steve again today. Poor Steve is looking after a sick dog, which is a shame. Poor Steve's dog.
Yeah, get better soon, Steve's dog.
Yeah, hopefully Steve's dog will get better soon and his lovely transatlantic heirs will be back on the podcast soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of pressure on us without him, isn't it, really?
It is, yeah. It is. It feels like a sad shell of its former self.
It does. I mean, we miss him greatly, and he had so much when he's here, and I just don't think it's not the same without him. It really isn't, Iain.
It's not, and it's obviously when I write the extensive script for these episodes, I have to then go back and re-edit it and take all of Steve's stuff out, and this well-polished, well-put-together machine that this is. It's not just us busking it.
Are we here for a purpose?
We are here for a purpose, yes, we are here for a purpose. What gaming have you been up to recently?
So my Thursday night still continues to be D&D 5th edition. I mean, that's been running now for probably over 3 years. I think we've hit 13th level. We're getting some access to some serious magic. It's the highest level D&D game I've played since I was a kid. Because when you're a kid, I mean, you played at silly levels, right? But since being a grown up, this is like the highest. D&D games only ever seem to get to level 10 and then people lose interest and start again, or it becomes too hard to ref. Most doing a great job until we're up to 13th level. I got a feeling we're not a million miles away from a final confrontation with the big bad guy, but who knows? We'll see. And then on Monday night, it's just recently come to the conclusion of a Dark Heresy game that Sandy's been running for us. It's very strange. Sandy's a very open worldy kind of ref, and he's, it's very different from some of the games I've played where they're on rails and you're going from A to B to C to D. He's very open and so for a lot of it, I think we were sitting there floundering and frustrated and not knowing where we were going. But actually, he's done some really clever stuff. I hate to say it because if he hears this, his ego will be even larger than it is already. But he's done a good job.
It'll just inflate and be a whole mess of an ego. That's good. I'm actually finishing off a D&D campaign that's been running for almost 2 years. We're not level 14, we're level 7. So half as powerful as you, and my little rogue guy is hopefully going to get an end to his story. That's been a lot of fun. It's a game where my son was telling me, are you playing a rogue? Well, you should do blah, blah, and blah, and then you can basically be Batman. And I looked at the qualifiers that he gave me. I'm like, I can't actually multi-class to be a monk. And he was like, oh, well, So it gave me that sad revelation that not everyone can be Batman.
Not everyone can be Batman. And, it's true.
Not everyone can be Batman, including my rogue. My rogue is definitely not Batman. He does fulfill that wonderful stereotype of rogues of he's got all this stealth coming out the kazoo, and it's always, hey Iain, you could sneak in there and see what's happening. And I'm like, I could, but we all know what's going to happen in this role. Oh look, there's a natural one. I trip or decide to bring along a load of pots and pans with me as I try to sneak into the enemy lair. But it's been proven to be a lot of fun. I'm also running Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, The Enemy Within, with my group. Now, you say about Sandy's open world stuff, The Enemy Within is obviously a campaign that's fairly prescribed. It's good in that there's sections of it that are kind of open world, and that there's kind of some good advice in the new edition. It's almost like, hey, relax. If the players decide that they're not going to follow the plot, it's cool, let them go do the stuff they enjoy, and you can always suckle it back to the main thing, which is kind of nice. But we've hardly even get into the plot, and I'm looking at what I've written, and it's like, nope, we're not doing that then, because they find something else that they're interested in. It's been cool. We've only had one combat so far, and there's been lots of role playing and people kind of getting into the skins of their characters, which is nice. I'm very grateful for Foundry though, because the thing that's put me off Warhammer 4th edition for years is they've, if possible, made it more complicated than 1st edition was, and they've really doubled down on that kind of late 80s school of game design. And thankfully Foundry has got some excellent modules for it that does all that clever stuff for you. So all the calculations for combat, there's a thing you use in combat called advantage, which is a score that you accumulate as you do stuff, but you lose it if you get hit, but you can gain it from doing other things, and there's a lot of who's got what at any given time, and thankfully Foundry just does it all for you. It just works it out, and there's no need to try and calculate in your head what all these modifiers are. So it's going very well. Absolute shout out to Cubicle 7 for the Foundry modules. They are professional beyond belief. They are. I've made Foundry modules before, and it takes a lot of effort to make them. There's a lot of kind of trying to dust off your JavaScript and remember how to get certain things to work, but these things are incredibly polished, so clearly a lot of effort going into them. Or maybe I'm just really bad at making Foundry modules and don't realise what effort is actually involved.
Luckily,
but yeah, these guys do a great job.
I was going to say, luckily for you, there are some people that clearly do know how to make Foundry modules work.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just me with vast walls of text. I did that recently for Steve was wanting me to run L5R 4th edition, which is probably the best edition of L5R. And there was a really good Roll20 module for it, but I do everything through Foundry these days and don't have a Roll20 subscription. Sorry, Roll20. That's obviously that lucrative sponsorship deal going out the window there. But with Foundry, it's got the base mechanics for L5R 4th edition, but everything else you've got to build out. And I was like, I can do this. And I got about part way through one of the clans, and I'm like, oh no, this is a nightmare. This is too difficult. There's so much. Every skill you've got to create because it doesn't have it in there. Every ability you've got to create. And at first I was like, I could just do the early abilities for people, but what if they want to buy this? And then what if they want to buy that? And before you know it, you're looking at several hundred pages of rules that you've somehow got to translate electronically. So that didn't happen. So sorry, Steve, that's why we're playing Warhammer 4th Edition and not L5R, because I'm lazy. But we are not here to talk about Warhammer 4th Edition, Dark Heresy or D&D. We are here to talk about Pendragon, the game of knightly goodness in King Arthur's fictional world. I don't think that's the official tagline, but it's what I'm going to stick with. So, Jabe, what's your experience with Pendragon? When did you first come across it? When did you play it? And what are your initial thoughts?
I mean, we're talking first edition, so I think we're going back to when it was first released.
85.
Was it 85? Oh my god, I am that old. It was something completely different to what we were used to playing. So at that point in time, I'm playing AD&D and things like that. And Pendragon came along, and it was the first game I actually really came to that actually focused more on like the personality of the character and the role playing aspect of the character. And we may have got a little bit carried away with how that worked, because despite me being that old, I was still young at that point. And then we started rolling for everything, and it was like, what would I do? Oh, let's pick a virtue or a whatever, and roll against it. So I'm sure we'll get into what I'm talking about these personality traits and stuff later. It was weird because basically everybody plays a fighter. There's no real wizards, and there's no, well, there are, but you don't get to play them, right? And there's not a huge amount of monsters or magic or anything like that. It's quite a low fantasy thing in that kind of aspect. It was really different to what we did, and I think it was quite formative around the kind of, as I said, developed personalities for characters, and it served me well since, I think.
Well, I remember first seeing it in 1991 do you remember a magazine called Games Master International?
Oh yeah, I've probably got some copies actually somewhere over.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of reviews for King Arthur related stuff in one particular issue, and I remember seeing all the there was a whole bunch of supplements for, I think, 3rd edition of Pendragon in there, but that was the edition where it was really branching out into, well, you don't just need to play a knight, you could play a Pict or an Irish knight, or you could be a Scandinavian, or you can play a Saxon, or all these other things. So there was all these source books released, and I remember seeing those source books in the Virgin Megastore in Glasgow in the KSAM section, because I was ravenously hunting for Call of Cthulhu stuff. It always intrigued me because the art was beautiful. It looked really, really good. I never actually played it then until I came across it at university a few years later, and there was a guy in the club who ran it. But I think similar to what you said, I think he'd come from AD&D and was very much a role player, ROLE. And
you mean ROLL, right?
Yeah, ROLL, yeah. I'll edit that out. Or I won't bother. Who knows? But, yeah, ROLL. But he wanted to roll for everything. Yeah. And the game just wasn't fun, because it was like, okay, so this is really just a game of Simon rolls to see what the rest of us do. And we had zero agency. That was my initial takeaway, was this game gives you no agency, because every time you do it, the GM was like, okay, you need to roll your mercy versus cruel trait, and I botch it, and it's okay, you're gonna wipe out the village. I'm like, well, why? I don't want to wipe out the village. And it wasn't until years later, and there was a friend of mine who ran Pendragon, and it's when it was with White Wolf actually for 4th edition, and he was saying, well, you really like White Wolf stuff, you should see what they've done. And my first thought was, oh my god, they've not used the storyteller system, have they? He's like, no, it's not. It's the original Pendragon system. And again, I immediately was like, oh, I played that at university, I hated it because I didn't have any agency. It was just like, roll on this table of traits and see what you do. And he's like, no, that's not the way you play it. And he took me through this edition and kind of really poured scorn on the guy who'd run it before. And he was saying that you use these for dramatic effect. It's like humanity in Vampire. In Vampire, you're not rolling humanity, or you're not rolling for self-control at every little thing, but it's when it's dramatically appropriate. Likewise in Pendragon, it's not like, do you roll mercy or cruel to see what attitude you take to the servants at home, but it's like you finally defeat your nemesis, And that's when you roll it. Do you spare his life, or do you become cruel? Because that's the dramatic tone of the Arthurian stories. It's like people being undone by their virtues and their vices, which makes perfect sense. And as a bit of background, I had to study some of the Arthurian stuff at university because I did English literature. That's why I work in technology these days. But we had to look at Lamont d'Arthur and also Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And the theme that runs through them is people being overcome by their passions and their virtues at the most dramatically appropriate moments. Like in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, he essentially gives into temptation and takes a thing that could magically protect him when he's acted with honour throughout the entire thing. But he comes to this one moment where it's like, this could really save my life. Okay, you know what, I'm going to give in to temptation and take this. And that's a dramatically appropriate moment, which is very fitting for Arthurian tragedy and all the stuff that goes with that. That really appealed to me because that captured the essence of these stories. I remember quite enjoying them at university after I got through the trudge that was medieval English, because, spoiler alert folks, for those of you who haven't studied literature, it's not very similar to modern English. It's more like German. When you get through all of that, the stories, the things that really appealed was that build-up to tragedy. The whole Morte d'Arthur is a tragedy. It's about Arthur's beautiful dream for Britain is essentially undone. And, he dies heroically at the end of it. Spoiler, but I think everyone knows that. And that's what I think Pendragon truly captures is that tragedy that is built into Arthurian stories. What's your experience of playing with the various mechanics?
Absolutely. So I actually looked out, and I've got one of my character sheets actually here in front of me from a game that was run from Pendragon that was run by a guy called Rob. Did a fantastic ref. He's one of the best refs I've actually played with. And when he first said he was going to run Pendragon, I was like, oh, but we're all going to be just knights, and we're all going to be. But he manages to keep it all really interesting. But to go over the thing, you've only got sort of 5 stats compared to the usual sort of 6, but they're all, a lot of them: size, dexterity, strength, constitution, and appearance are kind of like the 5 stats. But the main bulk of what we've been talking about is these personality traits, and they're paired and split across a 1 to 20. Okay, so you have energetic versus lazy, and they add up to 20. So if you've got 13 energetic, you've got 7 lazy, and so forth. And they go down all through the virtues, the vices, and there are, I'm just actually counting them now, 13 pairs. Seems an odd number, 13 pairs. But you also got glory, which was the main kind of mechanic for progressing your character based on your personality traits, is particularly if you exemplified some that were good for your religion. So if you were a Christian knight, you needed to be honest and chaste and pious and all that kind of stuff. If you were a pagan knight, bit more lustful, a bit more honest and generous, but very proud and so forth. So you had some conflicting. You
played a pagan knight, didn't you?
Oh yes, I played a pagan knight. Of course I played a pagan knight. Always played a pagan knight, So
yeah, I can't see you in this exemplar of Christian piety.
I can do it. But I didn't at this point. So you roll these stats and you get some various sort of levels between, as I said, 1 and 20, and if you've got a trait that's above kind of 16, you become known for it. It's exemplary. So Sir Cadogan the Just was born because he had a very high just stat, so he was very good, not very arbitrary, he was very fair. And then the other thing that came into it was passions, and every knight had the same sort of basic 4, which were loyalty to his lord, a love of his family, hospitality and honour, but then you could add your own ones. So this guy that I've got here was really didn't like Saxons, okay? Had a hatred of Saxons out of the kazoo, and it would really, if got woe betide if a Saxon crossed his path, And a lot of it was, I agree. When I first started playing when I was a kid, it was, we would roll everything. Roll your energetic versus lazy, see if you get up in the morning. It's roll your greed, to see if you eat too much breakfast or drink too much. And it's like that. I agree with you, Ian. It's quite lazy. I mean, it was good fun for 10 seconds because but it's not. There's no player agency involved, and it needed reining in, as you said, to the dramatic and the kind of relevant points of the story. And when you did that, like Rob did for us, they were really good. I mean, can I talk a little bit about D&D alignment in this? Should I? Because obviously it's almost like the opposite to alignment, right? Because you've got all of these personalities much more developed, but it's a similar concept in that if you don't know what your character is going to do, look to this and it will guide you. Right? It shouldn't mean every decision is dictated by these things. It's when you either haven't got a clue, in which case, go for it, or, as you say, dramatically appropriate. Pick something that, in which case the lack of agency actually becomes quite enjoyable,
Yes, exactly. And that's what I highlighted on when I did the history episode, was when you actually look at it does actually give you more agency, and it gives you these signposts in terms of this is how, if you're famed for being just, if you're in a given situation where you're meant to be fair, then you're probably more likely than not going to be fair. It's not going to be you roll a dice, you're famed for being just, therefore you're going to be fair and going to arbitrate correctly. And I much prefer it to the D&D alignment system. I mean, I think everyone's had that experience where there's somebody who plays lawful good but basically uses that as an excuse to do genocide at any given opportunity. And you're like, you're actually playing lawful evil. No, I'm upholding the law. I'm being good. I'm like, you just wiped out a village. You're basically Darth Vader. You're lawful evil. Whereas with Pendragon, it's not so defined. Like you say, you've got 13 different things, 13 moving parts. That is a hugely complex combination of traits, and they can guide how you behave. And I like the fact that they introduced that system where if you were a different denomination of knight, like if you were a pagan knight or you were a Christian knight, you have different traits because it shows the cultural values. And I know they did that with older editions with if you were from a different culture, you had different traits as well. Like if you're a Saxon, you had different traits to if you were a Cymric knight, for example. And it really helps sort of bring that world to life, and it means that people aren't behaving the same way. I also kind of like the fact that the book really makes out that these are knightly traits. Like your average peasant toiling in the field is not going to be affected by these. These are the traits that mark you out as something special and something different because you are guided by a code of honour. Whereas the poor fella in the field, he just wants to survive and have enough to eat. Whereas you're more concerned with your good name and the good name of your lord and behaving in a virtuous manner rather than, am I actually going to get some bread for my family this day or are they going to starve? You mentioned as well the passions where you're guided by a devotion to certain things, and the passions take all sorts of different forms. As you said, it's things like love, honour, etc. And those are really great. If you're running Pendragon, those are great role-playing opportunities. Like the example that's always given in the rulebook is Sir Lancelot in La Motte d'Arthur, that his love for Guinevere is what makes him like the best knight in the universe. However, it's also the thing that ultimately ruins him. That's the thing that causes him to betray his lord and bring everything crashing down. And if you're a clever ref, you should be keeping an eye on what your players' passions are and putting those situations in there that force them to make a choice between what they want to do and what they don't want to do. And I like as well, there's mechanics in there that if you fail a passion roll, you become melancholic because your great love is not what you thought it was, but there's also the chance you'll go mad and just run off naked into the wilderness for like 5 years and then reappear, presumably having got therapy in the wilderness.
And to be honest, that's just a Tuesday if you're a pagan knight, though. Running off naked into the woods. I think the other major thing I think Pendragon brought in that I'd never seen before in a role playing game was that focus on relationships as well, because death is inevitable in Pendragon. There is no resurrection. There is no magical healing. There's a bit of herbs and stuff like that. You might be able to get a bit of chirurgery or whatever, however you pronounce it. But the other thing you've got to do is the intention is for you to marry and have kids and run your estate so that your peasants aren't worried about where their bread comes from to survive the winter. Surviving the winter was a big deal. It was a huge thing. You have to make all kinds of rolls in the winter down period. I think they made a thing that every adventure was basically 1 year.
I really liked that it was almost like every adventure was just a thing that happened to you during essentially the spring and summer. It was like a thing, but there was a whole bunch of other stuff that happened, but you roll in tables for that because it's not like a super accurate night simulator. It's like, no, we'll roll to see what happens in the background. And you're right, the winter phase really made Pendragon stand out. Because again, for those of you unfamiliar with it, Pendragon is a game about legacy that, as Jason said, you need to get married and have kids because when your character dies, you're going to play your heir. And your heir inherits a whole bunch of stuff that you had beforehand, but it actually makes the winter phase. I remember playing it and getting genuinely worried in the winter phase. Is my, sickly 1-year-old heir going to survive the winter, or is he going to die in his cot? Which is pretty bleak.
Yeah, and will my wife survive childbirth? All these things. I mean, you're talking about these games are supposed to be set in that kind of Dark Ages period from 7th century to kind of in that kind of few hundred years following that. So, childbirth was a big thing. People didn't always survive it. Your kids may not survive the winter. Your horses may not survive it. I mean, your horse was really important.
Yeah, there's a literal does your horse survive table.
Yeah, absolutely. Or there's a horse personality table in one of the editions,
there was,
think, as well.
And there's all different types of horses you can buy as well.
And chargers.
It's very horse focused.
It's quite horse focused. Yeah, it made a difference on your jousting ability depending on what your horse was and things like that. So
yeah, if you had a quality horse. Yeah. Interestingly, I talked to one of my friends about Pendragon. It was just when I was doing the history episode, and once I explained it to her, she was like, Why would I as a woman want to play in this game if my sole objective is to have kiddies but I might die? And there is a nod to that in 5th edition where if you're a female player character, you get a bonus to your childbirth roll, I guess, because it's not much fun for it to be, and you die in childbirth. So there's a bonus to female player characters for giving birth. That was the thing that did fascinate me when 5th edition came out, because there's rules for female knights. Now, there's been rules for female knights since 3rd edition. It's not a new thing, but surprise, surprise, certain corners of the internet were absolutely outraged at this and claiming that this was historically inaccurate and how dare you have female knights in this game. Like, this is a game about magic swords. There's a wizard called Merlin in it. It's set in a version of Britain in the 6th century where they're wearing 14th century armour and carrying 14th century weapons, and you're concerned that because a woman and a horse might be able to spear someone, that's the least accurate thing.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? I mean, it is. There are parts of it which are the attempt is there to be, historically accurate. As I said, wintering and having things die in childbirth, or having, your horse, your heir and things like that, or indeed the joyous events of childbirth and so forth. There is definitely some kind of effort to be historically accurate, but it is not a historical game. Arthur is a legend, and by that I don't mean he came back with crisps when he went to the bar. He's a proper legend, right? So, but it is a mythology. It is not accurate. Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, I think all the characters we've ever played in Pendragon have been male knights. I think even when we've had a couple of girls playing, they've played male knights as well. There definitely seems to be, I don't know, inherently sexist, I guess, which is poor, but only because we let it be. It doesn't have to be. As you said, there were rules for it.
The book makes out that it actually gives examples historically of women who were warriors at that time, which it makes fascinating reading if you're a history nerd like myself.
You'd say you can't have female warriors. Well, tell Boudica. I mean, do you know what I mean?
Right, exactly. They're just trying to encourage more people to play.
Yeah.
like it's not to say, like you give the example. There's women who will be like, yeah, I'll happily play a male knight. Equally, there's probably other women like, no, I want to play a female knight. Why can't I play a female knight? Like,
No reason you can't.
There's no reason you can't. Just play a female knight. And again, it's this fantasy kingdom that you're essentially in.
Brienne of Tarth, if you take Game of Thrones, for example. Game of Thrones is as much of an accurate historical representation as Le Morte d'Arthur, okay? It's, you know, yeah.
In fact, Game of Thrones is probably closest thematically to Pendragon than many other major fantasy franchises.
I may have hit on something there.
Fantasy. Yeah, exactly. You could easily run a Game of Thrones RPG using the Pendragon rules.
Very easily indeed. Yeah.
But I think the other thing is that the actual concept of knights did not exist in 6th century Wales, which is what we're actually talking about here. Therefore, let the ladies play knights if they want to.
Absolutely.
You mentioned before the stats on your character sheet. I think the keen-eared listener will work out that those are basic role-playing stats. If you played Call of Cthulhu or RuneQuest, those stats will appear very familiar to you. But the actual system itself is almost a cut-down version, because unlike basic role-playing where everything is a percentage, in Pendragon, all the skills are basically between 1 and 20. I don't know about you, but I found playing that actually made things flow more easily, I feel, and there was less prone to sway than sometimes you get in like Call of Cthulhu. It used to annoy me that I'm this like world-renowned expert in like ancient languages, and someone's like, we have this tome, we need translating, and I roll like 86, like, no, you can't translate it. Like, oh, great. And I mean, obviously, it's not that cut and dry. If you're a decent ref, you're like, it takes you a bit longer to translate, but it felt very, very open to swing. Whereas I think with 1 to 20, it feels less inclined towards a way. Plus, when your stats went up by 1 point, it felt like more of a big deal in Pendragon than in Call of Cthulhu when your skill went up by 1%, for example.
I think it's quite a clever system. It's not the most intuitive, I guess, because generally if you're fighting or you're doing something, it tends to be an opposed roll. Generally it's just roll under your skill. So every skill is rated from 1 to 20, roll under it, you succeed. And a critical success was if you rolled the exact number of your skill. So if you've got 15 in longsword, then you roll 15, that's a critical. Rather than, in fact, a 20 was the worst roll you could roll. Okay, so theoretically, Iain should be great at this game because he's never rolled a natural 20 in his life. So he should be great at it. So, but when it was opposed, the interesting thing to me was always highest roll wins that is under your skill. So that means if I've got 14 skill and you've got 6, there's much more chance of me winning, and I'm going to beat you much more frequently than you're going to do me. So it's almost like the guy with the highest skill is in a much better position than the guy who isn't, in my opinion. So,
but that is kind of fitting with the source material, I think. I mean, that fits with. I think there's one moment in Morte d'Arthur where Lancelot takes on 1 billion knights on his own, and it's because he happens to have melee 20 in statistical terms.
Do not take Lancelot on in a joust, is all I'm saying. But combat was lethal, absolutely lethal.
Yeah, combat is brutal.
Hit points never went up. Literally added 2 stats together, and that was your hit points, I think. The maximum you're going to have is 36 in those, right? They're 2 level 8, 2 18s. And if you got hit by a major wound, if you took enough damage in a round to be a major wound, that was you pretty much down and out, and potentially having long-term ramifications. So the old knight who with 1 arm or 1 leg was definitely a feature. Didn't sugarcoat it.
That's something I really liked about it, though. And that's the fact that, as you mentioned, your hit points never went up. They just went down. As you get older, your stats, as all of us who are getting older know, your stats go down. Your physical stats start to decrease. And there's a roll in the winter table to basically see how much you degenerate every year once I think you're over 30 or something. And you're just going to get worse and worse. But as a knight, to maintain your glory, you have to be out there doing knight stuff unless you abdicate to your heir. So, as you mentioned, the old knight who is crippled and missing an eye and just basically propped up in his horse, but out there for one more, glorious run into battle. That is a feature of the campaign. I also like the fact there's the sort of the knightly etiquette that if you're defeated in combat, you're not necessarily dead, your opponent may spare you and ransom you off back to your estate, which is quite a nice way to soften the blow. But usually if you've taken a major wound, you're not in a great shape anyway, and you're probably going to die of sepsis because medical science isn't really a thing in the world of Pendragon. But I like the fact the combat is fast moving and brutal, and the fact that as a knight, most non-knightly foes, you just beat them. If you're against a load of peasant levies, you're going to tear through them because you're a trained warrior and they're essentially peasants with spears.
That, and you've got chainmail and a shield generally as well, helps.
Yeah, chainmail and a shield, and you're a massive horse.
Yeah.
And, they've basically been dragged out the fields where they're worrying if they're going to make enough food for the winter. And I think it's where the conceit of, like, every adventure is, like, a thing that happens in a year. It means you're focusing on more important stuff. There's not loads of adventures where you're fighting against loads of mooks. The adventures that you focus on are the big things that happen. Your knight may go back at the end of the winter. It's like, I remember there was that peasant uprising that we put down in 10 minutes flat. You don't play the peasant uprising out because that's not fun. It's just you threshing your way through a bunch of peasants. However, you do play out the adventure where you find out who the instigator was, and it's actually some dark sorceress who's sorreled the minds of the peasantry. So it fits very well with making adventures relevant and fitting the knightly theme.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of focus, at least when I played, around knightly games as well. So tests. So it wasn't necessarily you went out and fought your way through a horde of bad guys and found whoever was at the end of it. Sometimes one of your events a year might be you entered a jousting competition, which entered a melee, a grand melee or whatever, and then you'd fight and you'd win a prize. Maybe that was what you were aiming to do, or you would impress that lady that you were trying to win over, and so forth, taking favors and things like that. So there was an awful big focus on the kind of not just gaining XP, killing things and moving on. There was a lot done that just, as you say, it fits thematically so well with, like, oh yeah, well, I'm not actually very good with a lance, but if I want to win this tournament, I best buck my ideas up and things like that. So
yeah, one of the best games I played on was, the scenario was essentially, like you mentioned, a tournament. But there was a load of courtly intrigue happening, and there was the events happening, but there was stuff happening in the background, and it was trying to work out what the scheme was. In this case, it was somebody who was poisoning certain knights so that they didn't perform well in the joust. And I remember that my character went up against some guy who was like the best jouster in this particular county, and I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be terrible. And I absolutely blow him out the water. And that had me thinking, that was weird. I thought he was really good. And then it turns out he's been poisoned. And, oh my god, did you poison him so you could win? And then I had to go clear my name by finding who had done it. So that sort of stuff's fantastic. And again, very fitting with the source material. It helps build the world and build the atmosphere of the Arthurian side of things, rather than it just being D&D where everyone's like playing a paladin essentially.
Yeah, and this is the great thing. I mean, I mentioned Robbie did some great stuff. I mean, I think I'm literally looking through my passions here, and there was one to a Lady Baron, and Lady Baron was basically put forward as Lord Cadogan and Sir Cadogan's future bride, and I've got a really low love score for her, so that clearly didn't work out very well.
You're the worst.
No, I couldn't help it, but I don't think she had a particularly good. I think it was like a case of they're both trying to almost like forced together. Neither of them wanted it. All she wanted to do was ride. She wanted to ride horses. That's what she wanted to do. She was a bit, and I think at one point I managed to sneak her in as a disguised contestant into a horse race. Effectively, was one of the things that we did, which probably wasn't very knightly of me, but I'm just not honourable. This is different, all right. And then I don't think she didn't win it, which was a bit anti-feminist. I thought she should have won it, but never mind. And then the other thing he did, which was one of the best things I think, is we were set before Arthur. We were in Uther's reign. Okay, this is Uther bringing the clan, trying to bring the clans together and all of the lands together. And Uther had a son, and it just so happened that myself and my mate Jason Shrimpton's Christian Knight happened to intercept this guy with a beard smuggling out this baby boy. And I may have distracted what's the name? I can't remember his character's name, but the Christian Knight to allow Merlin to make an escape with the baby Arthur. So that was and it's just little touches like that where you actually realise you are in this background. You don't have to be Arthur, Gawain, Lancelot, these guys. The idea is you're on the fringes of it, or in this case we're on the fringes of it, and that was fantastic. I was just like, I was so made up that basically I'd helped Merlin escape with Arthur. Mr. Shrimpton wasn't very happy with me.
That's one of the things that I really like about the Grand Pendragon campaign, because I bought that, and it's like an absolute beast of a book. And when you read it, you can tell this is Greg Stafford's magnum opus. This is his passion just poured out on paper. The guy clearly loved the material. But to your point, it's exactly what you describe. You have this whole campaign from like beginning of Uther's reign all the way through to when Arthur dies at the end, and you play in there, but it's these incidental parts. It's not like, hey, you're hanging out with Arthur and doing Arthurian things. You are, as you mentioned, at the fringes of the myth, enough to be part of it. But you're not the main guy. You're not Lancelot. You're not Gawain. But you're embroiled in that world, and it builds. Like, I've never seen a campaign as atmospheric as the Grand Pendragon campaign. Just reading it, I've never played through it, but reading it, it just reeks of atmosphere. Like, I've played in some of the really big campaigns, like Masterfully and Enemy Within, and they're always touted as these cornerstone RPG campaigns, and they're really good. But I would argue that the Grand Pendragon campaign is probably one of the pinnacles of campaign design, just for the atmosphere it has. There's all this information on setting up like Salisbury essentially as this sandbox for your players to play in. All this advice on little adventures you can do, and then there's these things you can drop in on a year-to-year basis that happen that are related to the main campaign, and it slowly builds over the years. I mean, you can get years of play out of that campaign. I think there's something like about close to 90 years worth of campaign material. So if you take each one of those as a 4-hour session, that is a lot of hours of RPG stuff going on there.
Count me in.
So yeah, exactly. I would love to run it. It's an incredibly good, well put together piece of work, and also vital for home defence. If someone breaks into your house, hit them with the Grand Pendragon campaign. They are not getting back up. That is a hefty book. Okay. Which actually brings me on to my next question. Did you ever play any published adventures, or was it all homebrew?
That was all homebrew. Well, as far as I'm aware, I mean, the very fact you're talking about the Grand Pendragon campaign and it's spanning the Uther to Arthur, I mean, maybe he was running some of that. I don't know. Maybe he got some ideas from some of that. But as far as I'm aware, it was all homebrew. When I was playing it in school, a guy, Craig, was running it. And he did a lot of stuff. Everything, as far as I was aware, was homebrew. I don't think I've ever knowingly played any of the published adventures.
Yeah, that's what I found as well. Like, when I played it, the guy running it, in both instances, it was all stuff that they'd come up with. But the interesting thing I found in both cases, even though at university it was very much, you roll on your passions, your virtues, and see what happens. But the adventure stuff that we did do, it had a similar atmosphere to the stuff that the better campaign that I played in maybe 10, 15 years later, it had the same feel to it. And I think it's a testament to the advice and guidance given to GMs of making it Arthurian. So it feels Arthurian, it doesn't feel like D&D. This is not you in Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms wearing plate mail. This is something different. You are in 6th century Wales or Salisbury or wherever you are, it has that feel to it. You know, there's not orcs, there's not goblins, there's loads of Saxons. Those are your mandatory foes, but it feels that way, and I did find that consistency between different campaigns. It's something though that disappointed me with the latest edition. So if you read the latest edition of Pendragon, there's a note at the end from Greg Stafford who basically says this is Greg's ultimate edition of Pendragon, and he makes a nod at the fact that because I've got really old and I'm not probably going to write another edition, and sadly the poor guy passed away. However, it's not really a complete edition. The core rulebook is like the D&D player's handbook. It tells you how to make a character, and it tells you some rules, and there's a little bit about the winter phase, but there's all sorts of, and more stuff will be coming in this book. But it doesn't have like a GM's chapter to say, this is how you build an Arthurian story. There's none of that, it's just rules. And there's tables for, here's all the different types of horses you can buy, and different types of armour you can buy. But there's no GM section, and I know that previous editions had that. I think 5th edition's really good. I've seen a copy of that, and there's a whole ton of stuff in there that makes it very, very complete. But sadly, this latest edition doesn't have any of that advice. What editions did you play through? Obviously, you played through 1st edition when you were...
I honestly couldn't tell you.
Child.
I think I've always just played 1st. So this is the thing. I'm sitting here going, oh yeah, 6th edition. I don't even know how many editions there are. I think they say 6th. I did have a quick look and see what the latest one was. And actually, there's some comments on the internet about a similar thing. About it's more like a player's knight's handbook, effectively. But I remember the 1st edition. It came in a box. It was from Chaosium, if I remember. And it was like, that was the only edition I kind of remember. I am now suspecting that Rob might have run the Great Pendragon campaign, by the way, because my liege lord apparently was Roderick of Salisbury, and now I'm like, hang on, did he run? And I thought you was great. No, he's still a very good ref. So, no, I don't.
You had to hear Rob. Jason thinks you're a charlatan.
Well, all of a sudden it's dented my confidence. No, because I was one of the things.
I'm not playing in another game that guy runs.
He's a charlatan. Yeah, because one of the things I've said before is like, you all play human fighters with chainmail and sword, right? Occasionally you might get somebody who's got a mace or a two-hander,
or an axe,
or an axe.
Horseman's axe.
Absolutely, and all of a sudden it's like that's. If you think about it, it's almost like the only difference between character is what and even the weapons don't even do any different damage. All the damage is based on your strength and your size. It's nothing to do with what weapon you're wielding and things like that.
The weapons are purely thematic.
Yeah.
I was trying to be all historically accurate. It's like, I'm going to have a horseman's pick, and it's like, cool, it does the same damage as a sword.
Absolutely.
Oh, right, okay.
He managed to play a campaign that lasted, probably 18 months, couple of years, and you never got bored with it, and you never felt limited by the fact that you were all, and what was focused on was not the fighter part, right? It was the personalities, it was the relationships, it was the sneaking Merlin out the back door while your Christian knight is looking and tutting at you, and he's not happy with what you've just decided to do.
Man, Shrimpton's so judgmental, isn't he?
Well, his Christian knight was very judgmental. So I'm not saying Shrimpton, but his Christian knight was definitely very judgmental. We set him up. He got married, had kids, all that kind of stuff. And whereas poor Sir Cadogan never settled down.
That's because he was just unhappy that woman who liked riding horses wasn't tall enough for him.
She wasn't happy with him either. So but if you think about it, how many of those marriages would have been arranged, or kind of were all for political reasons, not necessarily for people didn't marry for love back then. So.
I did like that part of the system though, because you get players who at first were like, I'm this young free-wheeling knight, I don't care, I've got a woman in every port sort of thing, and then you're like, no dude, you really need to get an heir. Yeah. You need to settle down. And then they're like, you'll do, come here, you'll do. Oh, she died in childbirth, wonderful. Love the 6th century and its socialised healthcare.
It's the only way of getting any form of immortality for your character, effectively, is to get an heir, and for them to get an heir, and so forth.
I think it's what makes Pendragon good is, you mentioned it earlier, is death is inevitable. Yeah. It's not like D&D where there's a resurrection spell waiting around the corner or anything like that. It's not like Warhammer with its fate points where you can cheat death. Your character is just going to get worse. I suppose it's very similar to Call of Cthulhu in that regard. Call of Cthulhu, you never really get better. You just start this slowly downward spiral into madness. With Pendragon, your character is going to get, you can see them get old and infirm. Soon they're not going to be able to sit in their horse and they'll become bedridden. And then you're going to have to abdicate to this young buck who is going to take over. But that's really cool, and that's what makes it what it is. It reminds me, and again, when I did the history episode, I actually found that there was a link between the two. One of my favourite games on the PC is Crusader Kings, which, for those of you who don't know, is a grand strategy game by Paradox. But unlike a lot of their games where you play a country, this is a civilization type game, you don't play a country, you play a dynasty. So you play a king or a queen of a certain dynasty, and your objective is not necessarily to conquer land and get more territory, although you absolutely can do that. It's to keep your dynasty going, which means you have to marry. You have to find, and ideally find people with good genetic traits that they can have passed on to your offspring. And that's what Pendragon is. Pendragon is about securing this lineage and making sure that when your character does finally go off to the pearly gates, you've got someone waiting in the wings that can take over and look after their estate. And it's quite cool because you inherit all the stuff of your previous character. Like, you inherit part of their glory, you inherit their estate, and or their debts,
their obligations,
whatever obligations, yeah, whatever they have. And I've heard these stories of people playing in campaigns where they're literally playing their great-great-great-grandchildren of the original characters. And I think that's fantastic that you've played through that much history, and that obviously creates a real living, breathing world because you can tell the legends of what your ancestors did, which you don't get in any other RPG.
No, that's true. That's true, and it's I don't know. I mean, how you could play I don't think I've ever played even my son or daughter in one of these games, you know?
That's because you never get married. He was too fussy. I've
had other characters that definitely did get married, definitely did have kids. I'm stunned into admiration with people that have actually managed to keep a game going that long that they would get into that kind of
Maybe
realm.
they were just really unlucky and they're just playing a whole bunch of infants because people just keep dying in the winter.
Yeah. Oh, one character made it to 30, you know? Yeah.
One of the things I liked about 6th edition, though, I've obviously mentioned that it's essentially a player's handbook. Have you seen the starter set for 6th edition?
Obviously, no, I haven't.
6th edition was curious, and they released a starter set before the main book. And again, it's another kind of wonderful KSE publishing debacle where 6th edition was promised for years. Then it's like, it's coming really soon. Here's a starter set, but no main rules. And it's a really nice looking starter set. The character sheets are gorgeous. They're like medieval, like manuscripts. They've got fantastic artwork on them. And you've got a little introductory adventure, like a fighting fantasy style thing that you play through on your own that teaches you the basic mechanics. It's a wonderful way to learn because every single roll comes up. And then you've got rules for a sort of mini campaign, which is nice, and the sort of the main rules condensed into a little rule book. The problem is, as a starter set, this is Pendragon. There's no rules for the winter stuff because they obviously want you to buy the main rules, but you're basically confined to playing the 6 characters out the box, and you're missing that fundamental core part of Pendragon, which is the legacy system that lets you move on to something else. And I always wonder whether, because there was such a big delay between the starter set and the main rulebook being released, whether there were some people who bought it, thought this looks really cool, and then just never got any further with it because the rules to move on to like the next stage of play were never there. Which is a shame because it's a really cool game.
Stuck with the longest summer that never ended.
Yeah, exactly. So the difference between editions in Pendragon, it's a bit like a lot of the KSE games, and mechanically they're not that different. Like if you think when you started playing 1st edition, I think I started 3rd edition, and mechanically it's pretty much the same. as 6th edition. You have this roll under system, you have the virtues and vices which haven't really changed, and it's more like little tweaks under the hood. I know with Call of Cthulhu, like until 7th edition, KSM hadn't really changed the rules in any shape or form. There were a few minor tweaks here and there. Characters were a bit more powerful throughout editions, but it wasn't until 7th edition that they actually changed how the rules worked fundamentally. And I quite liked that with Pendragon, and there was this consistency. Like, I played 3rd edition, then picked up, I think when I played it, it must have been 4th or 5th edition when I, again, like you, I wasn't even sure what edition we played with the, in the mid-2000s. It must have been 4th. But it felt exactly the same. There was no need to relearn anything. And I think they just added more stuff for GMs and more stuff to, like, behind the scenes to keep it going. But one thing I know that they did add was rules for playing wizards. And I've never used them, but looking at the criticism of it, like when I was doing the history episode, I went and looked this up. They were not favourably received. It wasn't just that the rules were not great, but the general consensus seemed to be is you've killed what the main theme of this game is.
Yeah.
This game is you're playing Arthurian knights. This is not D&D. You don't need a wizard in the party. Wizards are meant to be rare. Like, there's Merlin and maybe there's an evil guy somewhere, but
Morgan Le Fay.
That's
right?
it. You don't. Yeah, you don't have wizards like just knocking about doing wizard stuff. And likewise with, I mentioned like 3rd edition. I saw those reviews in Games Master International for the different publications, and seeing those publications in the shop. Apparently they weren't massively favourably received. People were like, I don't want to play a Pict or a Viking or any of the other cultures. I want to play a Cymric knight doing knightly stuff in Arthurian Britain. By all means, have those as antagonists and having colour on what it's like north of the wall in Pictland. That's cool, but don't necessarily have players playing them. What's your feeling on that?
It's a mixed bag. I think that, so wizards, no, go away. No. I don't want anybody throwing fireballs or charm persons or anything like that. That's reserved for, as you said, Merlin, and we should all be terrified of magic. I mean, there might be the old wise woman that has the odd herb skills and all that kind of stuff. We're talking way pre, Christianity isn't even the major religion a lot of the time. So having a wise woman who can do healing and a bit of chirurgery or whatever, potions or whatever, that seems okay to me, but it's not really going to be much of a player character, right? Because, you're not going to be establishing a lineage and all this. I suppose you might, but I don't think so.
A lineage of wise women.
Absolutely, it could be. Who knows? But the other, I don't know. Some of the other stuff I'm not too fussed with. I mean, I think Chris came into the game we were playing with this game that I've got the character sheet for, and I think he came in as a Norse, as like effectively a Viking, which is great because as long as he wasn't a Saxon, I was fine. Because if he was a Saxon, we'd be having words. So I don't know. As long as it doesn't dominate. I mean, I guess it's like when you look at. Sort of look at some of the Hollywood remakes of certain legends and stuff, where you've got a guy who's he's a Saracen, but he's come over from the Crusades and now he's Robin Hood's best mate or whatever. It's like, are
you bad mouthing Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, in 1991 extravaganza?
I'm not bad mouthing it. I enjoyed it, but saying that, Robin of Sherwood, the series with Herne the Hunter, and that was phenomenal, and that had magical aspects into it and stuff, but again, not particularly from what I would consider the protagonist kind of perspective. It was all stuff that happened to them, and rather than they did it themselves.
I always felt sorry for Morgan Freeman in that movie, and that he's trying his best to do his Saracen accent. Kevin Costner doesn't even bother. Neither does, what's his name? Who is it plays Will Scarlet?
Wasn't it some Cockney geezer? It was some Cockney geezer, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. It was an American
It was an American lad. Okay. See, all I'm now thinking, all I can hear in my head is Ray Winston doing Beowulf. I'm here to kill your monster.
Yeah, it was Ray Winston as well in that King Arthur film that they did with the one where he was like a Roman centurion or something. You've got Ray Winston playing like Gawain or something. Boz. He played Sir Boz, and it's just Ray Winston playing Ray Winston. It's like, oh, Arthur, yeah, I'm going to give him a good scene too, mate. Like, are you really?
But still the best Arthur film, as far as I'm concerned, is Excalibur.
Oh, Excalibur's brilliant.
Awesome
I absolutely
film.
love Excalibur.
Absolutely amazing.
Christian
film.
Slater, that's who played Will Scarlet. And he didn't bother with an English accent either. He was, and also you had a bunch of random people in Sherwood Forest with West Country accents.
Yeah, because Sherwood Forest being in Nottinghamshire.
In Nottingham, yeah.
Maybe dumb.
They land at the White Cliffs of Dover, and Kevin Costner's like, by nightfall we'll be in my ancestral home. I'm like, are you sure? Because this is like the 1200s, and you're in Dover. And you're trying to get to Nottinghamshire, which is a fair old distance.
Geography's it's just not important, is it? Let's face it.
He had fast travel unlocked, so him and Morgan got up there in no time at all. But yeah, right, Excalibur is a brilliant film. I really enjoyed
amazing.
that.
If anybody's not seen it, I heartily recommend it. It's just, the only thing is, I'm now worried is that I did watch it a long time ago, and this might just be rose-tinted spectacles, but. That's what this podcast is all about, right? So, Helen Mirren was in it?
Helen Mirren was in it.
Yeah.
Who else did you have?
Patrick Stewart, I think,
Sherry
was in
Lungi was in it. Patrick Stewart was in it. Gabriel Byrne was in it.
Yeah, it's a great
Liam
cast.
Neeson was in it.
Amazing cast.
Great. Absolutely amazing cast.
And a great film. But overlook the fact they're wearing basically 13th century French full-plate armour, but
no, don't, because that's what Pendragon's all about. In Pendragon, you can eventually get that as well, and it's not accurate in the slightest. But woe betide you play a female knight, because that's historically inaccurate. Yes, thanks, incels on the internet. Going back to Pendragon and away from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which I'm sure we could talk about for hours.
And then we'll get you onto Braveheart, and then you'll never stop.
Just don't even. Do not even start on Braveheart. That's our word. You don't get to use that word. Braveheart's probably as historically accurate as Pendragon is.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So.
With it, in fact, Pendragon's Pict supplement is probably the source material that they based Braveheart on. All the woad on the face, except the 6th century is probably fairly accurate for that compared to the 14th century, which Braveheart is based in.
I saw some guy on telly basically putting up an argument about how Arthur and Guinevere in particular was buried in Glastonbury Tor. So, and I'm like,
well, though.
Well, fictional being was buried here. You can say where you want, right?
It's a bit like Whitby. They've got that graveyard, and for our international listeners, Whitby is a coastal town in the north of England, and it's famous for the fact that it features in the story Dracula, and it's very popular with goths for this reason. But there's a graveyard in Whitby. It's all the way up a whole massive flight of stairs up the side of a hill, and there's a rumour that Dracula's grave is there. And loads of people go up to look for Dracula's grave, and oddly enough, there is no grave of Dracula because Dracula's a fictional being, and also he's a vampire, so he's not going to actually have a grave. But apparently, it was a story invented by locals to get people to come to go and visit this graveyard, and it works. All these tourists like, oh, where's Dracula's grave? Well, it's up that massive flight of stairs. Off you go. And you get to the top, and there's no Dracula's grave. But yeah, that's similar to the King Arthur stuff. Like, if you think the amount of myths and touristy stuff spun around Arthur, it's I've been to Tintagel, right, which is down in Cornwall. It's a beautiful part of the world. It's worth a visit. They're leaning heavily into the Arthurian connection there. There's statues. There's a lot of stuff in the tourist shops.
Absolutely, but it's it's fantastic, and you go up there and you could imagine it. You really could imagine it. So,
well, especially up where the castle is, it's very atmospheric.
Yeah.
The way it looks out over the
sea.
sea, and you've got all that. Yeah,
it's a beautiful part of
it is absolutely fantastic. There was a fascinating thing that I read when doing the history episode about, because I was going to go into the whole how historically accurate is the legend of Arthur, and then realised there are a million podcasts out there about that, and we were talking about role-playing games. But he was talking about if you look at the archaeological record of, especially that sort of southeast of England, Wales, Cornwall area, there is all this stuff in the archaeological record that basically shows the Saxon encroachment as they moved inland. But then it gets to a certain point, and it's for like a period of, I think it's like 25 years, there is nothing. Like, it stops, and then it carries on again. And this sort of suggests that there was some sort of ancient Britain war leader at the time who managed to halt the Saxon advance for a small period of time and, keep that local culture, that Romano-British culture going. And then presumably he died, and then the Saxons carried on their rampage. But I think that's about as close as you get to an actual historical Arthur. I mean, there's tons of books on it, and there's tons of podcasts on it, and there's a million YouTube videos talking about how historically accurate Arthur is. Yeah. But I don't think we're concerned with that, because we were talking about a fantasy game where, as you said, they get to wear 14th century French plate mail while jousting in 6th century Britain.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and much maligned Clive Owen film about was probably, where he was a Roman legionnaire. It's like,
And he's facing against vaguely Saxon, vaguely Norse bad guys who have got crossbows that function as machine guns for some reason. And then you've got a bunch of druids hanging about with woad on their faces in the southeast of England. Yeah, it's quite something.
But yeah, historical accuracy is not what we're going for.
Anyway, we are coming up to time. I think actually we're considerably over time in terms of because we always set this limit that we're going to talk about 1 hour about the game.
Have we ever managed it?
We're well over that. No, we've not. We tend to ramble. This was the thing, a little peek behind the curtain for our listeners, that when Steve said he was ill, Jason and I are like, are we going to be enough to talk to about Pendragon? Yes, turns out we do. Actually, one little aside, I think we mentioned this. Remember our Palladium episode we did a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
And we basically talked about the fact that Palladium's a bit of a mess, but we all really enjoyed it. With your misogynistic koala.
He wasn't misogynistic.
He was misogynistic. He was James Bond the koala.
Okay, fair point.
But one of the supplements for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game that I remember seeing at the same time as these supplements for Pendragon was a supplement called Mutants in Avalon. And it was for their After the Bomb setting. Essentially the After the Bomb supplement for the British Isles. But it's like King Arthur has returned, except he's a mutant crow, and he rides around on a giant slug. That was his steed. I strongly remember the cover is him sitting on this massive snail and fighting bad guys.
Yeah, he's never going to get anywhere fast, is he? And when he's jousting, the guy's got time to fortify before he gets there.
It's a big old snail though. It's a massive snail. But yeah, that was a really interesting little take on it. And I never actually got that book. I just remember the cover and the blurb. And part of me is kind of intrigued by it and might want to seek out a second-hand copy just so I can see.
I think you should.
What the After the Bomb Arthurian scenario is that involves King Arthur as a raven riding on a giant snail. So what are your final thoughts on Pendragon, Jason? If you're trying to sell it to people who've never played, what would you say?
It's not your typical game. It's nothing like you've played before, in my opinion. There are no levels, there are no wizards, but it is that the way it captures the source material is second to none. I've played various games that have taken a intellectual property of whatever description, whether it's your aliens or whether it's your Stormbringer and things like that, and nothing captures the Arthurian legend or its source material like Pendragon captures that Arthurian legend. you're absolutely right. You do worry about the winter phase and whether your sickly air is going to make it through. And I don't know any other game that makes you feel like that or has that kind of aspect to it. And you know, whether your horses are gonna survive, what type of horse you have, all this kind of stuff. So it's just a bit different. And the personality trait system, I don't think anybody's done anything else that comes close to it. I mean, I haven't played every role-playing game in the world. I'm sure somebody has somewhere, but you know, it was groundbreaking for me. And you know, as I say, the character sheet I've got sitting here was from a game that I only played probably 5 years ago or so. So it is relatively recent, and it's still captured my imagination. Still was enjoyable. And it's very different, so I'd heartily recommend, if you've got any interest in the Arthurian legend, go and reread one of the many versions, and then find yourself a game. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I think it's one of the reasons it's had the longevity that it's had is because it captures that source material. It's not that it's a niche game, because like King Arthur is something that everyone's heard of. Like if you're in the Western world, you have heard of King Arthur. It's not some obscure regional hero. It's like, you know, that Hollywood are making films about it. It's that big. And I know there was quite a nice story that I heard that when White Wolf lost the license to King Arthur in 4th edition, but one of the former founders of White Wolf, he actually got the license to give it back to Greg Stafford and say, look, I've kept your baby safe for you, which I thought was quite nice. But it has this enduring longevity, and I don't know anyone who's played it who didn't enjoy it. Like you, as you said, your first impression is, oh, I'm just playing a human fighter, great. But then when you actually play the game, it's something that sucks you in with the atmosphere and how different it is. The fact that you are genuinely worried if your family's going to survive the winter, and you're conscious about securing a legacy. So, like, in agreement with you, it's something that people should experience because it is completely different from anything else you play. Also, go and watch Excalibur. If you haven't seen it, if you're one of these young people who, although we're saying this now, I've not watched Excalibur probably in about 30 years, so it may be absolutely terrible.
I might go and watch it again. So if you have watched Excalibur, go and watch it again, is what I'm going to say. So yeah.
Although saying that, I rewatched Monty Python and the Holy Grail as part of the history episode. It's not actually that funny. I know that sounds like heresy.
Heretic.
But
Heretic.
I watched it and I was like, this isn't actually that funny. People like it because it's got catchphrases in it. That's why people like it, not for the actual humour.
The debate on what a system of government is, and, you know, whether it's doled out by some woman in a lake chucking swords at people.
I'll give you that bit's funny, but the rest of it, it's just like, oh, God, come on. I find that with a lot of stuff, you go back and rewatch it and you're like, oh man, this isn't actually very good.
I disagree. Holy Grail's fantastic. Life of Brian, amazing.
We will beg to differ on that.
Yeah, you can be wrong.
I'm a benevolent God. I will concede you that fact that sometimes I can be wrong. Not often, but sometimes. Anyway, on that note, Jason, thank you again for joining us. Hopefully we'll have Steve next time. Hopefully it won't be him or an animal that is ill, and we'll have the whole crew back. But thanks again.
And may the winter phase be kind.
And that was our deep dive into Pendragon's brilliant but troubled history. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please leave us a review and some lovely twinkling stars on your podcast platform of choice. We always appreciate that. We love reading them, and it helps with visibility, and it also encourages us to do more episodes like this. Also, if you've got any RPG history suggestions, drop us a line at roll.2.save.pod@gmail.com, because we're always looking for new topics for follow-up episodes. You can also get in touch with us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Roll to Save. We are a regular podcast on the history of RPGs. We have 70 episodes up at the moment, covering reviews, roundtables, history episodes, interviews, and some actual plays. So if you're new to our podcast, check those out and let us know what you think. Until next time, keep rolling.